Well, good evening and happy Sunshine Week, and welcome to a joint presentation of Delaware Press Association and the Delaware Coalition for Open Government. Hyperscale data centers in Delaware, a decision with lasting consequences. Sunshine Week raises awareness about the importance of open government and promotes dialogue on the negative impact of excessive official secrecy. It urges public discussions on open government with participants, including nonprofits, schools, civic groups, legislators, and media organizations. It's held annually during this week time of March, Sunshine Week coinciding not only with National Freedom of Information Day, but also with the birthday of the man known as the father of the Constitution and sponsor of the Bill of Rights, our fourth U.S. President, James Madison. The two most important things to gain from Sunshine Week are Sunshine Week actively promotes government transparency and accountability, and government transparency builds public trust. Find out more at sunshineweek.org any time of year, not just during Sunshine Week. The purpose of Delaware Press Association is to promote and uphold the highest ideals and standards of journalism and communications, to encourage the exchange of ideas and experiences, to offer professional development opportunities, to recognize outstanding work, and to coordinate the efforts of the DPA affiliate and the National Federation of Press Women, our parent organization, NFPW. More information available anytime, DelawarePressAssociation.org. The Delaware Coalition for Open Government is committed to promoting and defending the people's right to transparency and accountability in government. We serve as a resource through education and advocacy, and DELCOG works to strengthen Delaware's Freedom of Information Act and its application. More information available anytime, delcog.org. Well, data centers, they are quickly popping up around the country. Power and energy demands of artificial intelligence technology continue to grow as well. The large-scale data center site that was proposed by Starwood Digital Ventures on land adjacent to the Delaware City refinery, also near fragile wetlands, is also would require massive amounts of power and water. We've recently had a coastal zone issue come up with that proposal as well, but nonetheless, we are closer, likely, it seems, to the beginning than to the end of the data center boom in Delaware. How much do government agencies know about these proposals, and will these projects benefit Delawareans in the long run? How can we ensure public transparency and accountability in development of this industry? Joining us tonight, first of all, are Olivia Marmble, who is land use reporter for Spotlight Delaware. Olivia writing articles about a wide variety of subjects, including land use law, affordable housing, energy systems, and transportation infrastructure. She aims to help readers understand the complex systems driving development across the state, as well as impact of the growth as well on the first stage. She has covered the plans for data centers in Delaware and has written about 20 articles so far, at least, on the subject. Welcome, Olivia. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. I'm going to keep my microphone muted when it's not needed because sometimes the street outside can be loud.
That's okay. That's okay. David Carter, a Newcastle County Councilman representing District 6, and for nearly 3 decades, Mr. Carter has served as a senior environmental scientist and manager for DENREC, and as a member of the board of directors for Delaware Audubon Society, has fought for environmental accountability of industrial polluters, also serving as professor of public policy at the University of Delaware. Councilman Carter, good evening to you.
Well, good evening, and thank you. And
All
it's
right.
been an interesting process. This is a deja vu from when we dealt with siting energy back in the 80s and 90s.
Oh,
Then again, of course, about 10 years ago, the group from Newark that worked on a data center, and it just keeps coming back. So,
yeah. All right, sure. Good to have you with us. Danielle Swallow of the Delaware Sea Grant, Coastal Hazard Specialist with the Delaware Sea Grant, providing technical assistance and outreach to Delaware communities on building resilience to weather and climate hazards, and is co-founder of Rascal, the Resilient and Sustainable Communities League, professional network of organizations that's dedicated to helping communities thrive in the face of a challenging climate. Also active in advising communities about land use practices and disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. Good evening, Danielle.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Have you on. Appreciate it. Also, a late join with us, Jameson Tweedie, Delaware Public Advocate. Jameson became the Delaware Public Advocate in April of 2025, so a little less than a year ago. Quite a year it's been for Jameson, I guess, following nomination by Governor Matt Meyer and confirmation by the Delaware State Senate. The Public Advocate's role is to advocate for the lowest reasonable utility rates for residential and small business consumers in Delaware, and to represent Delaware's interests in regional and federal energy policy matters. He has over 20 years of experience as a Delaware lawyer, previously working at a nonpartisan energy and environmental policy center and the Delaware Department of Justice, representing the state of Delaware on environmental, energy, climate matters, and in private practice. Jameson Tweedie, thank you for being with us today, and we welcome you to our DelCog and DPA program for Sunshine Week.
Very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Terrific, terrific. So, Councilman Carter, we will start with you. Bring us up to speed, please, on where things stand as of last Tuesday regarding county regulations of this industry, and are they specific to the AI industry or not? Because there was a little bit of comparison, I'm sure differences as well, with this and also the warehouse boom that we saw just a couple of years ago, and that's still unfolding as well, I guess.
So I would say it's very different. We have defined data centers as a completely separate land use in the code. We're hoping to do that with warehouses with a ordinance that Dave Tackett and Janet Kilpatrick put in with land use. But it's really important. We have not seen developments with this type of impact since Shell Oil and Union Carbide wanted to come in and build a large refinery on our coast. We did all that energy siting and reviews. If you go back and pulled up the old coastal working papers from the late 70s when we had the approved plan for nuclear on where Whitehall now sits. But we just haven't seen anything of this scale, and it's coming at you very quick. There are very important roles in our federalist system that have to take place at the local level, who seems to be getting hit hardest across the country because it's coming fast and no one's prepared for it. There are very defined needs that we need at the state level, particularly for state energy and some of the support for some of the land use work we do. And there are clear roles for the federal government. And particularly if you go back and read like working paper number 5, I consider them the Federalist paper of Delaware's Coastal Zone Act. If you read those working papers, you will see why. They really underpin it. It was very visionary. That's why it picked up this use. What we have in Newcastle County, we were able to get an ordinance through. We could not make it apply to the date of introduction. So those applications that are in, we have to see what we could do to manage them by other means. That was a difficult compromise one we had to make. But importantly, before this passed, you could put data centers in any non-residential land use in the county. So you could have taken, for instance, Concord Mall and taken it down and put a giant data center there a month ago. You can no longer do that. The only place you could do it really are in areas that are zoned for heavy industry or industry, and they are not by right. They are now special use. So in addition, if we see a community impact come up, it could go through the board. Let's go in for a variance board of adjustments, and we can put specific needs that are documented for that project. We also have sizable setbacks to protect communities of 1,000 feet if they could prove that they could control the noise and there aren't problems, or it's adjacent to a land use that may not be like residential and compatible. They could reduce it to 500 based on a lot of studies. I don't know how that'll happen. That's going to make it much easier to control our noise. We do have noise requirements, light requirements, but with a 1,000-foot setback, just by the physics and the sum of squares and the attenuation of noise over distance, we will be able to control it. We require closed loop cooling systems, and that will reduce energy in most cases by about 30%, and will reduce the actual water usage in most cases by 80, 85, 90%. So that was really important to protect our water resources or improve it. We did require tier 4 generators. They're still diesel, but they're the cleaner ones. We tried to get some additional stuff in. I couldn't keep that in. And we have decommissioning requirements because we don't know this industry is coming at us really fast. It could get much smaller as a footprint and inside. And I've got a lot of warehouses and I'm worried about what's going to happen if they go vacant. I don't need large data centers too because they're hard to redevelop. Now they have to bond it and be prepared to deal with that. And we did require space for microgrid integration if we go to any other type of power sources or other things. Public Service Commission and DENREC and others didn't want us to specify it at the local level. I backed off on that, but we do require them to put space aside to be able to do that. So we probably now have, not on every point the strongest, but I believe we now have probably the most comprehensive data center legislation in any county in the country.
Councilman, what steps are you taking or considering to ensure that the public is up to speed on all this in terms of notification? Because a lot of it's been hashed out in public, but a lot of what you say has also been, daytime meetings, probably filings that people don't look up, and that's sort of a thing. And lo and behold, you're like the people in South Haven, Mississippi, or Vineland, New Jersey, who are hearing these noises and such. But on the one hand, it seems the public is engaged, but on the other hand, for those who are just moving in or whatever, how will the public be continuously informed about this? And since our focus is trying, after all, on government transparency and accountability, two levels of it here, I guess, the industry's accountability and openness, and also government's openness.
Well, from the government, I can tell you that I have had meeting after meeting. My last town hall meeting that I did for the community with Kevin Kaneko was over 200 people. With the Odessa Fire Hall, we will continue to do those. We are working right now with my land use office on some Q&A fact sheet stuff. I'd like to get a brochure. Of course, I'm also working very closely because I serve on the board of directors for National Association of Counties. We're getting information out about data centers. I post them on my Facebook page. I'm trying to get it at them. I think the more civically active people are beginning to understand it, beginning to piece it together, and it's going to take time. The transparency issue has been a challenge. I know I wrote a pretty detailed letter to Starwood Digital Ventures back on November 28th, specifically asking for it. They were putting out Facebook posts of $75 million in taxes and things that I sat down with our chief financial officer and ran them. And because Delaware doesn't have a business tangible personal property tax or a sales tax, 90 to 95% of the taxes they collect in places like Virginia, we cannot collect. So, and then again on January 9th, I met with Anthony Filisteria and his attorney, Pam Scott, along with my council attorney. I specifically asked them the same question and why they didn't respond to my letter. And they point blank told me that, well, we haven't calculated those numbers yet. And for me, it raises the question, were you deceiving my public with all your Facebook posts? Or are you deceiving them now? Because they all came out again just before the meeting. So there is no transparency. And I believe we should do a thoughtful cost benefit analysis. They are specifically how to, we're hearing the unions come and they were not easy to work with. They have a labor agreement.
Yeah. They
refuse to share it. I think that if you're going to use that to influence public policy, it should be shared in public. Public policy should be done in public. So we do have a big issue here. We no longer in Delaware have the Delaware Development Office. OMB used to do these type of analysis and reviews. If you go back and look at the old working papers from the 70s, they were done by OMB. We don't seem to have a structure in the state, even the research end of our legislature. I don't see them doing the type and quality of analysis and economic benefits and economic costs to our ratepayers. Now, Jameson Tweedie is trying to do it on the ratepayer side. We need a comprehensive study, and that's got to be done at the state level. I've looked at some of these things. It's a real problem. Transparency is not there on the developer side of it at this point in the stage. They don't have the same requirements we do in FOIA, but I think if we're going to pass policy, we should not be giving them deference for things that they're not sharing information about.
Olivia, as a reporter trying to cover and doing an admirable job of covering this, by the way, over these past months, What have you encountered that hurdles you might have had to overcome where you really look at it and says this shouldn't I shouldn't have to work this hard to get certain information out of folks at any level, be it government regulation, the industry itself, what have you.
Yeah, so like Dave Carter said, it has been a bit difficult to get information from Starwood Digital Ventures. To be fair to them, they did eventually sit down with me for about an hour and a half long interview, with many different people on the Zoom call, from the company itself and different PR people that they had hired and all of that,
Yeah.
to give a pretty comprehensive explanation. I haven't heard any updated information about the tax revenue, for example,
Mhm.
based on what Dave Carter brought up. What I was told in that meeting was that they did take into account Delaware's tax law and just all the complexities of that. They weren't just copy pasting from Virginia, for example. But to me, the number just seemed, the tax revenue really didn't seem correct, and in terms of the economic benefit of it. So I mean, I'm not sure at this point. To me, it's a little bit of like he said, she said, and I would love to be able to tell the public exactly how much of a tax benefit this would be, but as David Carter said, I feel that that might need to come from some government official, and I don't see anyone doing that.
But a lot of that figures, a lot of complications figure into that, like
Yeah.
job creation, and
Yes.
bottom line, where these things go, right? We
Yeah, exactly.
we've seen some. I think it was a Better Delaware not too long ago, but maybe they got the numbers from the same place. But during and after construction, some number of $1 billion in economic output, 9.7 billion, 3,500 new construction jobs, 700 permanent full-time positions, $100,000 annual salary, and the average annual post-completion impact for schools and governments, some 75 million. How much do we know about the kinds of jobs that would be there? Who would be working there? What would they do? Anybody?
This is a
I mean,
question for me, right?
Olivia, yeah. What
yeah, go
if
ahead,
you want
Olivia.
to?
I could follow up too.
Yeah,
Sure.
of course. So, from my understanding, this facility is apparently going to be rented out to potentially several different companies. It's not like Starwood Digital Ventures is going to be the ones actually running this facility. And so what they told me is that there's going to be several employees on site that are not only in charge of the actual running of the data center, but are also associated with those specific company operations. Now, I fact checked the number of jobs with an official in Virginia and asked them whether they thought that 700 jobs seemed about right. And she actually told me that yes, 700 jobs seems about accurate because right now what they're using in Virginia, which by the way, that's a major hub for the industry. That's why I keep talking about Virginia. Um, they found that data centers create roughly one full-time job for every 9,000 to 10,000 square foot of a data center. This is 6 million square feet, so that leads to 600 to 667 jobs. So, 700 might be rounding up a little bit, but it's pretty much accurate. I just wanted to real quick say that in terms of the $9.7 billion of economic output, I found that in Virginia, which is again a major hub for the industry, all of the data centers combined produced about $13.3 billion of economic input output, which so to me it just doesn't make sense that one data center could almost equal all of the economic output of all of Virginia. But again, I don't have the very specific
Sure.
numbers. So
Mhm. Danielle from UD Grant. Good evening to you as well. And we talked about Rascal just a couple of weeks ago, its role in Delaware, and I'm sure a lot of this, if not under the purview of Sea Grant or Rescue, that is probably a pretty hot topic, right?
Well, this topic is generally generating a lot of community discourse for sure. And I want to preface that I'm part of Delaware Sea Grant. We're a advocacy organization, and we don't take any particular stand on data centers. I wouldn't even call myself a data center expert. I think I'm more of an expert, and reason I was asked to join today is because I work with communities up and down the state to build resilience to weather and climate hazards. And and that's why I'm also a co-chair of Rascal. So Rascal, just like Sea Grant, is really focused on getting best practices and fact-based information, science-based information in the hands of communities. And so that seems to align really well with the objectives of this event today, promoting transparency. So, we like to encourage people to ask the right questions. It sounds like you are, but I would just pose that there are, questions to ask. We know, for example, that in Delaware, we're going to be seeing, we've already seen a 3-degree increase in temperature, Fahrenheit, since 1895, but we're going to see another, 3 to 4 degrees increase by 2050. And then by the end of the century, over 5 degrees, maybe closer to 9, depending on how the global rate of emissions goes. And that's going to lead to, far more days of hot weather, like over 90 degrees. Summer evenings that don't cool down below 75 degrees, which also can be a real drain on individuals and infrastructure because there's not a lot of ability to cool down over the course of a day. There's going to be more demand for energy, just to cool these systems and our personal homes. And I think too, our state's going to see some increase in precipitation, but probably more on the order of rainstorms that can dump, an inch of rain or 2 inches at a time. And then we're going to see an increase in sea level rise, right? Which is the height of our tides is going to increase, and that's going to have implications for different infrastructure systems around the state. So trying to think about any large scale infrastructure project, I like to think about it in terms of, is it appropriately sited in a way that it's not increasing that infrastructure's exposure to different weather and climate hazards? And is it being designed and constructed in a way that it's improving the resilience of a community and it has an ability to adapt to these changes? Or is it going to diminish a community's ability to adapt to those changes? Those would just be some of the questions we kind of would pose.
Yeah. And we're not here really to bash an industry of sorts. In fact, I think, Danielle, when you and I spoke a couple of weeks ago about Rascal, and you can refresh me on what that stands for. It doesn't have to be an either or when you talk about some of the issues regarding resiliency and economic development and creating needed jobs.
Yeah, that's actually true. So RASCAL stands for the Resilient and Sustainable Communities League. We have 28 member organizations, including state agencies, nonprofits, university groups like Sea Grant. But yeah, I think the best outcomes are when you can see different co-benefits, right? Like there can be economic benefits as well as benefits to community resilience or to the environment, which is kind of lockstep with community resilience in many ways. So, looking for sort of the win-wins versus an either-or construct, I think there's probably room for that here.
Yeah. Jameson Tweedie, Delaware public advocate. This has been an issue talked about for months, as we've heard, and also you've been involved with presenting testimony and hearings at the Delaware Public Service Commission specific to these data centers. The demand they take regarding power and the concern. What is the concern, first of all, about the availability of power to power a growing industry, and secondarily, the impact on the other ratepayer and trying to blunt any such impact?
Yeah, great question and great conversation so far. Really glad to be part of it. So, the data center industry, as it is growing across the country, but particularly the Mid-Atlantic is one of the areas of focus. It is growing at a speed and scale that's unlike almost anything in the energy industry for decades. Mm-hmm. And so that means that you have these individual data centers, like the Starwood proposal that would add, almost 50% to the peak load of the entire state. So that means, one business is now needing almost half the energy of the entire state, all businesses, residential, commercial, industrial, right now. And so when you expand that out across many data centers, and they are, growing rapidly, that puts an incredible strain on the grid. So that means both concerns about reliability, and that's something that PJM is really focused on right now. Basically, if these are built at the speed and scale they are forecast to be built, will there be enough power in a couple of years? And so PJM is in sort of a massive rush process to try and figure that out. And then on the cost side, and obviously if there's not enough power at some point in the future, then that means at different times of the year during peak demand, different portions, different power customers will have to be turned off. And so who gets turned off is a huge question. And then on the cost side, the energy market is complicated, but you boil it down, and at some level, supply and demand still carry the day. And so if you are radically increasing demand for power, then you either have to radically increase the supply of power, or supply and demand are no longer going to be in balance and prices are going to go up. And we're certainly seeing that already in what's called the capacity market in PJM. That's the forward-looking market that tries to ensure there is enough power in the future. And the PJM Independent Market Monitor has already found that there are tens of billions of dollars in additional costs that have resulted in his analysis directly from data centers. And those are costs that then get shared out across the PJM region to ratepayers. So it's a huge concern, and it needs solutions sort of at all levels of government.
Can I add something to that, Mark?
Sure. Yeah, please.
So where I struggle, and I understand, I worked at the federal level with NOAA, National Service, federal consistency. I worked for 27 years at the state level, and now I'm working at the local level. All of this cost stuff that we're looking at, nobody is talking about the environmental externalities and what the costs of them going to be. We are majorly shifting our energy portfolio back to greenhouse burning gases, which means not those directly adjacent to a data center, but those who are feeling the consequences of rising temperatures in Bowers Beach or Kitsamick or Lewis may be seeing bigger events. And we are beginning to see some good economic analysis of those impacts in things like insurance rate changes and how many people around this country are losing flood insurance. It's a real economic cost that we need as a state to be factoring in. The same thing that James is talking about, we really need to estimate what the cost to ratepayer is going to be and have that on that cost benefit spreadsheet out 5-10 years. The capital budgets, we can estimate out 5 years. We should be able to do this and do it now. I have problems being on the edge of the PJM grid in a state that imports about 60% of our power, doesn't do a lot of generation. Unlike when we had the approval for the Summit nuclear power plant, one of the real wonderful things about that was access to barge and water and an area with no people. We don't have that anymore. So the siting considerations are really critical to solve it. And I know we have a General Assembly who are just kind of holding public meetings and flippantly talking about all of these energy things. Where's the study? Where's the beef? Do your work. If nothing else, please go back and read this document written 50 years ago that is more relevant now than it was then on energy planning. They have done more work on energy planning 50 years ago than anyone in my state government has done in the last 10. And we just need to wake up and look at it and understand the challenge we face and rise up to it. We're trying to do it at the county level. We've got to figure out how the state's going to come together and then how we interact with the same tension we had 50 years ago over refineries for the Coastal Zone Act that's occurring in our federalist system. That has to be done. I think it is just a public policy approach that can only be explained or described as completely stupid to allow this to go through without doing that type of analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. And don't hold back, please.
I
Just
won't.
say what's on your mind. Reminder, we are inviting questions. First step would be to get them into our chat for Q&A. We're going to continue with the discussion for a bit longer, however. So Jameson, in the interest of returning a little bit to our theme of transparency, openness, accountability, be it on the corporate level or even, in fact, the government level, take us through a little bit about understanding what's on a Public Service Commission docket and where. Elaborate a little bit on what Mr. Carter's recent comments, which are not new to a lot of folks who've been following the General Assembly, some of which, but may be new to some, about it was winter of 2025. People started really noticing the increase in their bills, delineating the delivery charge and noticing how large of a portion that takes up of the bill. And yet here we are some 14, 15 months later, and a nuclear commission study, a small nuclear reactor study is underway. But what else? And, getting the public involved, knowledgeable, and having access to information that's available through documents or otherwise. How do we do that?
So, great question. Wish I had exact answers.
A long one, I know, but
yeah, well, a couple thoughts. So, before the Public Service Commission, there is currently a large load tariff docket. The purpose of a large load tariff is to say these customers, large load customers like data centers, are unlike any other customer. They're not the same as residential or commercial or even industrial customers of any normal scale. And so they need to have their own category within how Delmarva handles power. And we need to make sure to the greatest extent we can that they are not shifting costs to other customers. So that is a docket that's currently pending before the Public Service Commission. It was started back around last Labor Day by a filing from my office and from Public Service Commission staff saying we need these customers, we need large load customers to be treated as their own category. And until they're treated as their own category, we need to have a pause on the interconnection of any new large load facilities in the state. So that's currently pending. There was a public comment session a week or two ago, but that docket has open written public comment. I think April 6th is the deadline for written public comment. So that is open and available for anyone who's interested in voicing their opinion. And we had a lot of public comment at the public comment session. So that's fantastic. We have engaged in discovery in that process to try and understand some of the impacts, not necessarily exclusive to Starwood. It's a large load tariff that would apply to any large data center facility. So we're trying to understand that, and we have retained outside experts to try and help us with this because it is such a new and different thing. On the state level, I mean, I'm not necessarily fully up to speed on everything that's happening at the state level, but we had the House and Senate relevant committees held a joint hearing. Was that a week ago? Where we had presenters from a bunch of different relevant bodies. So Reliability First, that's the entity that tries to ensure that the grid stays reliable. PJM, our grid operator, the Division of Legislative Research for the state that has done a report on data centers. Someone from Virginia presenting on their experience with data centers. And then I attempted to address sort of the difference in impacts that a data center here versus a data center somewhere else in the PJM grid would have, because we're all part of that same grid. And so data centers growing elsewhere will have significant impacts. And I know that legislators are actively looking at legislation. There's a couple bills that have been introduced already. But I just sort of go back to something that I said before, and I'm sorry to be a broken record, but it really needs solutions at all levels of government. And that means we need we need what comes out of PJM to not harm the states or ratepayers. and we need good and sensible policy at the federal level, and as well as everything that we can do at the state and level and before the PSC. Hopefully that's helpful. It was a long question, so if I forgot any part of it, just remind me.
No worries. Appreciate that. Appreciate that.
I can try to summarize the state efforts if that would be helpful.
Please.
Yeah, so there is a House bill and there's a Senate bill, and they do kind of similar things, but a little bit different. So if you'll remember, Jameson was just talking about the large load tariff. For Representative Frank Burns's bill, it basically would require the Public Service Commission to add some things to that large load tariff, including a separate rate for large energy facilities, and also to consider certain factors when approving a rate application, like whether or not the large load user would add risk to other consumers, aka maybe causing blackouts, and also whether that power rate that they would be paying would basically cover all of the actual costs of the electricity. Because one of the things that people are concerned about is that when you have one facility that is using so much energy, what has historically happened is that the cost of the transmission upgrades are spread amongst everyone.
Yeah.
But what if there's a transmission upgrades that are needed for just this one facility? Are we all going to be paying for that? That doesn't seem fair. So it would require the Public Service Commission to consider that as well. And then also it would require the Public Service Commission to consider whether the large load facilities would impede the state's ability to meet greenhouse gas targets. So there's that bill. And then there's the Senate bill by Senator Hansen that would require the Public Service Commission to create a certificate of operation that data centers would need to apply for, and then the Public Service Commission could basically say, hey, we're not going to grant this to you unless you give us this amount of money to do grid upgrades that are necessary for just your facility, like I was talking about before. So that's just the summary of what's happening at the state level. So I believe just Representative Burns's bill got out of committee, so it could go onto the House floor at some point. I believe Senator Hansen's bill is still in committee.
Okay. Good roundup there. We appreciate that, Olivia.
Yeah, I would also add that Senator Hansen's bill has a very detailed process to study the energy and have that certification. It's a critical step that I think I hope they can get approved. I hope we can all at all levels of government learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time and look at all the synergies of all these different policy impacts. What's happening right now is a very fractionated and fragmented process. And that scares me a little bit for something with this magnitude. We need to see how all of these policies integrate. We need to do that type of a cost benefit analysis that analyzes all of those together. Maybe this will have more benefits than harms. Maybe it won't. But it's a hell of an experiment if you haven't really done a lot of evidence-based policy development and research. And we are nowhere near that point as a state.
Sure. Returning to resiliency for a moment, Danielle, of the UD Delaware Sea Grant, there's been a lot of focus on one particular data center related to the coastal zone, but so much of Delaware is coastal, and it's not just beach, it's not just the bay, it's inland, it's streams, it's miles and miles away from the actual coast that we're talking about here. So does resiliency imply, Danielle, that there's been damage to repair, but also to look ahead and deal with any further threats or future threats, or at least try to identify them, those that are out there?
Yeah, well, actually, the federal government considers all of Delaware a coastal zone. So yeah, like to your point, that includes the inland parts of Delaware, certainly. And really, there's no community that's more than 10 or 12 miles from a tidal tributary. But um, I'm trying to understand your question about resilience. I would say resilience is about proactively anticipating, disruptions and changes, right? And that could be like this, the issues with the power grid, right? We're doing a fine job right now of trying to anticipate what some of the challenges are going to be that we're already starting to see, and then how this fits into that. And to me, in general, you want to have as much redundancy into your critical infrastructure as you can, right? So that if there are disruptions, you're able to rebound more quickly. And I know that there was some concern about the data center having generators that may or may not be using diesel, and that would, add to some emissions into the atmosphere, which is kind of counter to some of the policy objectives of the current state administration. Um, One comment I'd like to add, though, to this is that we have some climate change already baked into our system just from former emissions. And we're seeing those changes. There's recorded, increase in sea level rise up and down the state. We can observe that. We see more instances of high tide flooding. We see we're actually seeing evidence now of more extreme weather in Delaware. Um, we're going to continue to see that, but going forward, we have an opportunity, to rein in some of our emissions and to do our part so that globally we can kind of control that rate of acceleration that we anticipate and we're already starting to see. And that's going to give us more ability to adapt, because the changes that we're going to see from now through 2050, it's going to be challenging enough. But the changes that come after 2050 are going to be that much harder to adapt to. And so we've got to do our part to think about how resilient our critical infrastructure can be. Are we, adding to the problems or supporting the solutions with some of our critical infrastructure choices and the siting of different, land use options?
I think I might have been using the term resiliency interchangeable with restoration, which might be kind of related, but different things. Restoration implying there was maybe some previous pollution damage or whatever to restore, whereas resiliency, yes, you've got to look ahead a little further, I guess.
Yeah, resiliency is about how to rebound, anticipate disruptions and rebound more quickly. And it can be in the context of weather or climate. It can be in the context of a financial market dip. We use resiliency for all kinds of things, but it's gaining a lot of traction in the weather and climate fields because we're seeing these big changes afoot now.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, so, and Danielle, I mean, here's the issue I have is if we are changing due to AI our entire energy approach, energy infrastructure, and we get an acceleration, we know there's a cultural lag time for communities to adapt. Heartbreak Hotel in Bowers Beach and Donovan's, they used to accept that every other year or so they would get flooded. I'd go out there, they'd have a squeegee, they'd get the mud out, they'd hose it out, they'd get it cleaned up, they'd reopen. And eventually there came a point where it just flooded too often. They were too old to raise them, they don't do it. That was kind of a natural at a pace that we currently have. If we completely change our energy portfolio as quickly as it appears to be coming, I don't see how any community can keep up with that kind of natural adaptation that we can get them to do. I mean, we have adapted naturally. There used to be a surf avenue out in front of Rehoboth. The only place we've ever done strategic retreat is at Big Stone Beach, where Delaware Wildlands owned all the homes and decided to take them down. So these are the things that we need to make sure people are understanding and looking at as we go through, because they have these, external economic and social impacts that are going to could be significant. Maybe they're not. But why isn't part of the energy discussion on this right now? That's the concern I have. We need to look at all this and pull it together and decide, is this right for Delaware or not? Or is it better to work federally and say, if we really need all these data centers to run our new economy, Maybe it makes sense in the middle of North Dakota where it's really wet and really cold, and you have energy coming out of Canada, and you could fire up energy and run them and not have nearly the bad impacts. Those are the decisions
Yeah.
I'm concerned we're not having. If we're going to have them in Delaware, why Delaware City? Why Newark? If we really think we need one, why aren't we using the Edmore site instead of putting a crazy port there? Because you've got a site, the state owns it, it shares a boundary with the old Calpine plant that has a retired coal facility and a gas line you could run it. And guess what? The next quarter over has unlimited cooling water coming, reused water from the wastewater treatment plant. Why aren't we doing that as a state? Why aren't we looking at those options for siting?
Yeah, and I'll tell you that land use planning is, I think, one of the most effective tools that we have to promote community resilience. It's where and how we build our infrastructure that determines how well we're going to adapt in the future. And it also determines how much exposure we're accepting to that hazard, that risk. So, to your point, are inland choices being looked about? Because we do have we're seeing more extreme weather. Some of that's going to be right along the coast. Not all of it will be. We're going to see increasing, height in our tides. We're seeing that already. So it does pose some questions. Is there too much exposure along the coast? Would it be better to move it inland? Um, and yeah, the scale at which the data centers around the country, are being proposed and built, and the kind of the challenges with our energy grid. I mean, these are going to kind of create a lot of cumulative benefits and drawbacks. And if we're not smart and staying ahead of it, which is hard, it sounds like it's been especially hard in Delaware, then we're going to lose that capacity, like to make really smart choices to adapt. And those choices available to us are going to be more costly, and there's going to be fewer of them, available to us. So yeah, we want to increase our ability to choose between the most benefits, the most choices for adaptation. Um,
Well,
yeah.
after 40 years of
So
policy work, I will tell you, and a lot of that was environmental policy, land use is the last frontier, and I can trust you. Many lobbyists see that, they see the power of it, and they're going to fight us like hell, just like they did on the data center regulations.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's like you're suggesting, more information, more analysis is needed because it's such a huge decision, and it's hard to make those decisions without all the facts in front of you.
Well, let's get to a few questions from our audience since time is going rather quickly, but we do have time for a few more questions that we can get into the chat as well. One saying, our FOIA law, the Freedom of Information Act, our FOIA law governs government transparency. What can we do with our state laws to deal with corporate, phrased here, lack of transparency or straight up lies? In other words, what should we be asking of our legislators regarding everyone to be forthright and honest on that corporate level, which is something we should be asking of our government as well. Anybody? Olivia.
Wait, I'll take it. Olivia can take it. I'll take it for
Yeah,
that.
I mean, unfortunately, I think that there's just no way that we can get access to internal company documents. They're private companies. There's a good argument that if all internal company documents were available to everyone, then maybe there wouldn't be, good competition between businesses. There really are trade secrets, and as much as I would love to be able to FOIA certain company documents, that I don't think that it's realistic that will ever happen. I think that we could try to improve the FOIA laws for government documents. Honestly, sometimes it's quite difficult for us as a company to get access to even just government documents. There are sometimes appeals that are pretty clearly illegal, but it takes a long time for us to appeal the process. There are sometimes large costs that we have to bear as a nonprofit newsroom, but we choose to go through it. From the city of Dover, we recently received, I believe it was 5 boxes of documents in response to a single query that our reporter was that filed it was hoping to get, a couple of pages, something very specific, but that's a tactic that sometimes is used to prevent us from getting real information. But yeah, so I think that in terms of private companies, there are things that reporters do and that I have been doing, such as companies that are required to have a quarterly investors call, and that needs to be true information. They can't defraud their investors, so I've been paying attention to those. Of course, been following up many times with the company itself, but also going around the company trying to talk to many different experts. But in terms of just directly getting documents and information from private companies, I don't think there's anything that Delaware can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there'll be a certain stage where this becomes a document or a site plan filed, I guess, but until then, you're kind of what we might be seeing as a Delaware way kind of playing out a little bit.
Yeah, but I think the issue for me is I have perhaps a different perspective, and maybe Olivia's worked with me. I just have a policy after 40 years in government. If the press calls me for something, long before they can FOIA me, I'm just going to send it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's bad, it's a pay me now, pay me a lot more later, and there's nothing that pisses the public off more than not disclosing something. So you just take your hits whenever you get it out as quickly as you can. What I'd like to see explored in our FOIA documents is some kind of prohibition of using undisclosed information to drive public policy. As a public official, when you come to me, all the trade unions, all the working unions come to me and tout these numbers of jobs and all these wonderful things that they have in a project labor agreement, but it's not disclosed. It should not be used to influence policy. When Starwood is pushing out all of these numbers, 75 million in local property taxes, and I ask for the calculations and they don't give them to me. I've asked for them in writing on November 28th. I asked for them in person on January 9th. I should be banned as a public service from using those claims of economic development in policy decisions. You can't control the private industry, but you can control public officials and how they use unsubstantiated claims.
Got it.
And
Okay.
if not substantiated, put it in the law and say, if they don't disclose it, don't use it for public policy.
This might be something for Jameson, a question. Will additional electrical transmission lines and infrastructure need to be built in Delaware to meet excessive demand? If so, what counties and communities would be impacted by transmission lines? But it sounds like that's a question kind of getting a little bit ahead of the game with respect to where Delaware is ready to proceed with where transmission lines go and such.
So I had actually raised my hand because I was going to chime in on the transparency piece, and I was going to touch on transmission because I think it actually ties right together. So I saw the question in the chat about transmission. These facilities can require immense amounts of power. That power has to come from somewhere. They come through the transmission system. Now, if you imagine that one facility uses half the power of the entire state, then you get a sense of the amount of transmission that would be needed to get that power to such a facility. And transmission is incredibly expensive, so that can be tens of millions of dollars a mile to build out new transmission infrastructure. Now, we don't have exact modeling of what exactly it would cost for any given facility, and to some degree, that is a frustration we have in transparency. We have asked for that information from Delmarva, for example, for the Starwood project, to try and understand what the transmission costs are, and we have not gotten any clear answers on what the transmission investments would be needed for a facility like that. And I think that ties in directly to what Councilman Carter was saying, where you're trying to address a public policy decision and you do not have full information to know how to do it. I would just want to point out that there are aspects of both SB 205, which is Senator Hansen's certificate to operate bill, and Representative Burns' HB 233, the large load tariff bill, that would increase the transparency, increase the information we would get get about projects like this, so that we could have that information to make better decisions. In terms of like the specifics of the transmission, we just don't know. The transmission is sort of determined by the facility that then engages with the utility. Delmarva Power is our transmission operator for the state. So a huge data center facility would engage with Delmarva Power to understand what the transmission needs are. It would then be studied by PJM, depending on the scale of the project, and they would decide what additional transmission infrastructure was needed. We don't have a lot of great insight into any part of that at present.
Well, here's what we do know, Mark. We know that Newark, in their exploratory plan, has a sizable substation. We know down along railroad tracks there is a power line they would connect to, whether it's, I don't know if it's 300 or 500 kilovolts. So there will be a substation built specific for that one according to the plan. We know Project Washington is trying to come in for a variance to put a huge substation on the other side of the road from the red line infrastructure. So we know that plan is serious and is looking at it. And now I'm trying to understand, we just invested, and Jameson may have a better view of this, but about 10 million in that red line station, and whether or not we can recoup that from them if they do go forward with this, or whether the public just ate that, I don't know. It's a concern. Freightland has a line, high voltage line down the edge of the property. It was put in for power that's coming across the river, and I think all the way to Virginia without any drops in Delaware. It came miles through my district and pissed me off that I had no energy drops. But they may be able to tie into that. They do not have a set aside for substation yet, so that could still be speculative, whether it's warehouses or data centers are playing. Blue Diamond Industrial Park is in the same boat. And I really got into this more deeply than I wanted, because I tried to put that microgrid planning requirement into the county zoning that I got a lot of pushback for. But if we had been able to get that in there, we would have forced these questions to be answered before they could get plan approval. So it was a little bit of a loss, but you get what you can to keep moving.
Just one further thought on that. Councilman Carter popped it into my head. I mean, one of the things companies that are looking to invest in these sorts of projects look at is the existing energy infrastructure in a location. And so, for example, with Project Washington, part of why they picked that location is it's right by the Red Line substation, which directly connects into the two biggest transmission lines we have in the state, coming across the river from the Salem nuclear generator, running up into Pennsylvania to other nuclear generators, and then the big, so that's a 500 kilovolt line, as I understand it, and then a 230 kilovolt line that runs down the state from basically straight south from Red Lion. And so that proximity to that huge existing transmission capacity clearly plays a role in their decision making. And then the question is, how much more is going to need to be built, and who ends up paying for it?
Okay, terrific. Well, thanks for all of your input and your questions as well. We still have time for a bit more. And also a reminder, in addition to questions in the chat, we have some helpful background and links along some of the way, some of the things we're talking about, links to articles and some of the bills in question and such as well. We'll open it up to something kind of related. We've been talking about it, and it was mentioned earlier, where FOIA in Delaware might need some improvement, the Freedom of Information Act. Who's tried it, who's used it, and what has been your experience, and what do you think needs to happen to improve it? Olivia, you brought it up a little bit earlier on.
Oh gosh, I wish my other colleagues were here to talk more about this, because honestly, I've had really good luck with FOIA personally. I've primarily FOIA'd at Del Dot, and they are very responsive. They get to me before the deadline. They get me the specific documents that they want. But again, some of my other colleagues have received just boxes and boxes of documents, which is a tactic that governments use to try to prevent us from getting the actual information, because they're hoping to overwhelm us with just the amount of information that we get, so that we don't actually see the specific piece of information, and often the documents are just very confusing and very and just difficult to parse through.
And do you get a
Um,
charge? Do you get a charge for that?
yes, yes.
No,
Oh
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it can be in the hundreds of dollars. I don't know if it's ever more than hundreds of dollars, but definitely a charge for that. And just because of the time that it takes to go through all of those documents. Yeah. And also just in terms of timelines, there's sometimes just people just continuously, or government entities continuously just delay and delay and delay, and there's not too much that we can do other than going to the Attorney General and say, hey, can you tell them to stop? We in some cases my company has been prepared to go to court, but as soon as we threatened a lawsuit, then we got the documents, but it's so in terms of specific reforms, again, I'm sure that my editor-in-chief Jake Owens would have much more to say than I would, but I think having a stricter deadline and a set process for if people do not comply, and also more specific rules when it comes to actually having consequences for people who do not answer the very specific request that we got, and instead throw a whole bunch of documents our way to try to confuse us. But
Yeah. What one commenter here that says the General Assembly FOIA exemption should be seriously amended, and particularly their exemption from agendas. And they might be getting at, it could be a day before or whatever, and we don't know the agenda for the next day sometimes, it seems, as well, which technically is a violation, I think.
FOIA. Yeah.
Is it or is it not?
I mean, I get tired of double standard. I mean, we're not allowed to caucus.
Mhm.
So FOIA avoids that. For me, it's been having been on both sides of it. I remember Maya Van Ralston from the Riverkeeper when I was still working for the state FOIA'd me, and I said, Maya, could you give me specifics? I'll pull what you want. She told me she wanted everything. I had literally for the main channel deputy,
Mhm.
4 filing cabinets because we didn't have everything digitally. I said, if you want it, Maya, I'll give it to you. But if you can be more specific, I'm not going to hide it. I will pull what you need. So that's it. But FOIA has been around long enough that your rank and file mayor system staff, frankly, they're going to rarely put something in writing that they're not going to be comfortable to have FOIA'd. I mean, I learned that a long time ago. The reason I'm so open on FOIA is because if it's something that I don't want FOIA'd, I'm not going to put it in writing. I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to do whatever. And a lot of times when you get a good FOIA, often you have, supporters from within agencies who understand and have a good sense of what is ethical and right, and they're going to help and they're going to follow the law, whatever the law is, and do their due diligence to get it out. And then you do always have some that are more politically influenced, or just have somebody that has an axe to grind because somebody pissed them off, and then they play those games. I don't know how you regulate that. I hope that with time, everybody in government is going to realize that, what, just put it out there. We're all human. Sometimes we're going to do something stupid. It's going to get FOIA'd. But if you try and cover it up, that's 10 times worse than whatever you screwed up. If you send it out and say you're sorry, people are going to beat you up, but they're going to be a lot more forgiving. But I would like to see more stuff put on for the General Assembly that they should. I mean, if they're going to require it for all of us and write a law that requires it for all of us that are elected to local level, then they should lead by example and follow the same rules.
Well, it's kind of time to start wrapping up, so we'll raise a closing question, and you could start with Jameson, and on my screen we'll start with Jameson, work our way up to our other guests. But Jameson, as the public advocate and as a Delawarean, how do you think the data center discussion has been helpful in moving certain things forward, and also bringing out into the open some matters related to how government and job creation, energy efficiency work that we didn't know before?
Oh, interesting question. I think it certainly has brought attention to some issues that are worth getting attention. But I do also think that data centers are such a unique thing that their impact and what we're studying, what we're dealing with, what we're trying to figure out, um, doesn't doesn't directly translate in a lot of directions, at least on the energy and energy cost side. They are this new and different and completely different thing. Um, I do hope one of the things I hope is that it will bring greater public participation into what happens in front of the Public Service Commission. I think the Public Service Commission has been a very sort of like you know I don't want to say sleepy, but has been an agency that not a lot of people in the public participated in, and that meant that it was a very insular place where the utilities and a few people, a few entities would participate, but not much for the general public. And I really hope that what's happening now with data centers and cost crisis in energy will bring greater participation in front of what happens before the Public Service Commission.
Mhm. Danielle Swallow with Rascal and the Delaware Sea Grant matters regarding energy and data centers may or may not come under review with respect to coastal resiliency and such. But at least, do you think this has kind of opened some discussion and opened some eyes of the public with matters that they might not have been aware of before?
I do. I mean, I think it is a coastal resilience issue because, first off, where it's being proposed to be sited, at least the Starwood example, and you've got, potential for storms and hurricanes, and there's a potential for a lot of consumption of water unless they're going to use a closed loop system. There's a potential for diesel generators, which could add to emissions unless they create an alternative. Um, but you know what I don't hear in discussion is, I guess I think a lot about disasters, where as a state we've been fortunate not to have some of the larger disasters that some of our neighboring states have had, but we're due for one, and it's foolish to think we wouldn't. And that, for example, that there couldn't be a Cat 2 hurricane that makes landfall somewhere near Delaware and really affects this whole region. And I guess I wonder whether anyone's thinking from emergency response capability. Are there enough resources on the ground if there was fire and damage? Are those resources going to get deployed to the data center because there's so much pressure from industry to restore it versus your neighboring communities that might also need response activities? Um, I don't know if the design of that data center or data centers is being coordinated with the DEMA, the Emergency Management Agency, and others. So I guess I think from a larger context of like, or it becomes also kind of a source of maybe interest from terrorist activities. So I just think like, what are the contingencies in place? Do we have the resources if and when there is a disaster?
Sure, sure. Olivia, I sort of implied at the beginning, maybe you think it's true or maybe not, but we are at the very beginning of uh, probably the timeline of data center discussion and development with all the tie-ins to the electrical grid supply and all that. But how do you think uh, the discussion so far might have been helpful in terms of increasing awareness and the willingness of the public to hold corporations and hold government more accountable?
Can Dave Carter go first? There is a car alarm outside right now, if you can't hear it.
All right, well, we'll switch to
I'll have to
Councilman
go
Clark. Go ahead.
first. I
Yeah,
mean,
go ahead.
Mark, look, it's created some critical thinking that was much needed, but we're in a whirlwind, and it's hard to see the good side of whirlwind when you're in the middle of it. That started in Newcastle County. If you were at our meetings, there were people sharing love with me and people not sharing so much love with me. Hundreds of them at those meetings. People follow me home, people other stuff. But it's still being framed as a binary decision, and that's a problem. It's jobs versus no jobs. It's energy versus energy. And, we need, as leaders, as elected officials, to step up right now to ensure what comes out of this whirlwind helps us get to the critical thinking that we need that incorporates all of these added ideas. We need a framework. I had talked to a number of state legislators, including the Speaker of the House, who in July told me just to say no, which is illegal. I've talked to President Pro Tem gave them a framework if they wanted to do it through a pause on data shit or whatever, whether they want to do a pause or not, there's a reasonable framework. It could be done through a task force. We can look at these broader issues. We can have the counties involved. We can have everyone involved. The public is fired up. They understand it, and there are a lot of options out there. There are a few people on here like Amy Rowe and others were very active and led the charge for the data center in Newark. It eventually didn't go through. And guess what? You have a much higher level of construction jobs, a much higher level of permitted jobs, and it's not done. It was a better economic decision. Now, the community there in Newark was a very educated community. A lot of people from the university did impeccable deep research, dug into every issue, and drove that fact that it's going to be more difficult at the state level.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to keep pushing. I'm going to have to keep calling these legislators who, well, you're at the local level. We don't give a damn about you, whatever. It's like you get no respect. But at the local level, we have to be pragmatic practitioners that just focus on getting shit done. That's what we need to do. And we need help at the state level, and we're going to need help at the federal level. And we need right now, as elected officials, to do our goddamn jobs and put a framework together that will help us set the path to do this right. We haven't done that yet. That's a failure of the elected leadership of this state, that we have not done that, and we must do better. And every one of you that's an advocate on this call need to hold us accountable and make us do better.
Olivia, based on your reporting and coverage, do you see that happening? More public engagement and more public involvement. It's one thing, of course, to follow somebody home, but it's another thing to follow your hearings and your documents and all that, and know what's going on around you.
Yeah, well, I will just say that, to be completely honest, I started this job about 8 months ago. I believe my very first story was about data centers, so I haven't really experienced a Newcastle County Council meeting that was not during the time of data centers. So I can't exactly say whether or not this has led to more public involvement, but I have seen a lot of public involvement and a lot more awareness, honestly, across the country about power grids and how they're working, like Jameson was saying, and just larger conversations about these things that are quite technical, but are really, really important for all of our everyday lives. And I think overall that's a good thing. I will say that, of course, emotions are very high from all perspectives. I think partially because, and this is not something I write about a lot, but just because of the fears and anxieties around AI and what that will do for all of us in our economy, and whether this really will be a transformational technology, or whether we're in an AI bubble and our stock market will crash, or some combination of the two. I think that I hear a lot of that really influencing kind of the strong feelings behind all of this public participation. And I do think that it's really important to, when it comes to policy discussions, to set aside fears about AI, set aside fears about maybe getting a job, and try to be very practical about what our state needs in terms of both economic development and safeguarding our future environmentally, and in terms of just keeping energy prices fair for everyone.
Sure. Well, I would very much like to thank our guests this evening for being with us for this Sunshine Week presentation, co-presented by Delaware Press Association and the Delaware Coalition for Open Government. Olivia Marble, land use reporter for Spotlight Delaware, thank you. Newcastle County Councilman of District 6, David Carter, we appreciate your time very much as well. Danielle Swallow, Delaware Sea Grant Coastal Hazard Specialist. A very special insight tonight, and we really do appreciate that, looking at the matter of coastal resiliency and how it's widespread well beyond the coast as well. And Jameson Tweedie, Delaware Public Advocate, whose work on this very much continues as well. Thanks once again for everyone on the panel. Thank you to everybody who joined us online as well. The discussion will keep going as well, I'm sure, as this moves on. For more on Sunshine Week, please visit sunshineweek.org. Any questions or inquiries for Delaware Coalition for Open Government, it's delcog.org. And for Delaware Press Association, it's delawarepressassociation.org. Special thanks as well to the DPA Executive Director, Catherine Ward, and also the DelCog President, Bill Shields, and our President of the Delaware Press Association as well, Linwood Jackson. I'm Mark Fowser, and on behalf of Delaware Press Association, good night, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.